Over a year ago, in December 2022, my Discord community participated in a weekend-long game jam event. Or maybe the better way to put it is we did our own isolated game jam, where we got together, anyone could participate, and in a weekend we attempted to make something. And well, we did make something. It's here, finally. You can go try it for free on Steam, and it's called Bond Blues. It's probably going to take an hour or two to play. At first here, I'm just going to talk spoiler-free about the game and its creation, and then maybe halfway through the video, there'll be a spot where I tell you, hey, okay, stop watching if you haven't played the game yet, because I'm going to go into some spoilery reflection on said game. The reason that this happened at all was that there were a few people in my server who had particularly requested it, that wanted to do a game jam. They thought it would be a fun idea. Hey, casual, let's do this. And it did seem like a neat idea to me. There's definitely an array of talented people with different skills that we had at hand. And a game jam is kind of nice because you don't just have to be a back-end person. You could be a writer, you could be an artist, you could be a musician, a sound person. All those skills can be contributed to a quote-unquote video game. But the hilarious irony of the way that this played out is that there were two people particularly who were egging me on to set up this event, who were the people that were knowledgeable and savvy with back-end coding. But then right before the event, one of them left the server, and then the other one during the event itself just suddenly couldn't make it. So we had all kinds of talent except for back-end developers, except for coders, which is why ultimately we made the least gamey type of game possible, a visual novel. We initially had all these fantasies about it being more interactable, more point-and-click adventure, but we literally just didn't have anyone who could implement it like that during the weekend, so we had to go as simple as possible. One of my main responsibilities during the event was just being the project manager and making sure everyone had something to do, everyone was working towards the same goal in an efficient way. The writers, the voice actors, the artists, the musicians needed to all be able to have something to work on as we constructed this in real time, even though they didn't even know what the other people were necessarily building. It's like each person was putting down a piece of the puzzle, not really aware of the total image of the puzzle, because that's what you have to do when you have such a limited amount of time available. And even though we didn't have those back-end developers and we may have encountered other problems, my mindset was just to encourage everyone to push forward no matter what. Let's try to have made something this weekend. Let's just make sure we've made something. And it was long and tiring. I probably slept 6 hours the 2 nights and spent the rest of the day just in the VCs, helping people organize, write the script, edit it through voice line audio. And a lot of the charm of this project was that initial creation being so chaotic, because it was sudden. We couldn't hesitate. The main premise for the game, the character names, the character attributes, the concept art, the story, that was all decided within maybe the first 12 hours. And then all those things were done in a very collaborative way. The script was written by numerous hands. The art was largely done by 2 people with some other minor contributions. And then the game was voice acted by a dozen or so people. And then a nice hilarious detail too is that almost every voice actor was sick during that weekend we recorded it. I don't know if you can notice with everyone, but literally like everyone was sick that weekend for whatever reason. So you're definitely wondering, hey, this sounds interesting. Okay, but why did it take 15 months to release if this is supposed to be a game jam, something you do in just one weekend? So in actuality, 90% of the game content was finished within the weekend, but none of it was implemented and none of it was playable. We had all these assets and that was it. We had assets. It wasn't put together in a game. Thankfully, the user Liblung was an unexpected saint of sorts, because without anyone asking him, just within a few days after the event, he built the first build of the game in Ren'Py. And so we finally had a playable version, but it hadn't been play tested at all or refined. It is just the initial amalgamation, the initial gathering of all those assets. So on a technical level, there was tons of problems. There was typos, lots of bugs, mismatched voice lines, placeholder art, inconsistent audio levels, let alone all the big picture issues with the flow of the game concerning how the scenes work from one to one to another, plot holes, things like that. So the 15 months was mostly spent filling in those patches, the things that were missing, and then also just dozens of rounds of revisions of making sure that those bugs and typos and little problems were worked out. And to make it a little more complicated, hilariously, our main dev disappeared from the internet for a few months. So we had to get another dev to implement the changes, but then that process was somehow even more slow and difficult than before. It was like I would make a list of revisions that needed to be implemented and I would send it to the dev, but then maybe for every 3 revisions we needed, 2 of them would be implemented correctly. And so I have to have another thing from our previous batch of revisions that didn't get revised properly that I'd have to re-revise in the next batch of notes. And then this would just kind of continue infinitely. And then that dev also suddenly disappeared from our server. And then miraculously, like in the last couple months, the original RenP implementer returned, and he worked hard to finish the implementation and add all those final tweaks and such. So the magic of the initial event was definitely that everyone was there. We had 10 to 20 people available, working diligently and focused through most of that entire weekend. And in that kind of setting, it's super easy to get things done because everyone's there at the same time. The communication is fast, if not instant. But then we return to our normal lives and things just take ages. It's like, okay, we're missing a voice line from this guy. Hunt them down. Okay, prod them again, message them again. Okay, now they sent me the voice line. Okay, now I have to make sure the audio mixing is right. Okay, now I have to send it to the dev to implement it. And in between each one of those actions, it can take days, sometimes weeks. And it's just very inefficient in comparison to everyone being there that weekend. So I've played through this game 2 times, just checking for typos and bugs and problems. And at a certain point, you go crazy. It's here, it's finished. If you haven't seen it or heard about it at all, it probably feels super fresh. And if you're keen on visual novels, if you're keen on things with unusual charm, I think you'll like it. Please check it out. So we did spend a lot of time tweaking it, but the core of the game really has been unchanged from that initial weekend. And we just tried to make the most of it in the time since, in spite of all its flaws and blatant idiosyncrasies. So at this point, I'm going to ask you, go play Bond Blues, and then come back to this part of the video after you've played it. So, in terms of spoilers, one of the most hilarious and catastrophe-inducing aspects of this game's development was the plot that we chose, and the fact that the story was written, like the actual script was written by a lot of people who likely weren't on the same page about what the plot was supposed to be. So when we were coming up with the plot, the initial basic idea was clear. You're in this system, you're trying to sniff out some corruption, and initially we thought, oh, the judge is corrupt. That would make sense. But then someone had interjected in that initial process and suggested, what if the judge wasn't actually the guilty one, and he just seemed really guilty, and in actuality, the real puppet master is the postman, Darius. And I vividly remember this idea being really hard to fathom at first, but it seemed a lot more interesting than it just being, oh, the judge is simply the bad guy. And then to make things more complicated, we had this A and B path we created, and I believe in the A path, the judge was literally not supposed to be guilty. He was just supposed to be despondent. And then in the B path, he was supposed to be guilty, but so was Darius. It got very confusing. And the problem is that everyone was not on the same page for sure about the plot of the story that we were writing. The nuance of, please make the judge look suspicious, but in the end, we need Darius to be the real bad guy. That was hard to decipher, likely poorly understood by most of our writers, and then inevitably poorly communicated in the game itself. So if you found the current build confusing or unclear in regards to the plot, I can assure you that it's infinitely more coherent than the first build was. We tried to salvage it as much as we could without obviously recreating the whole thing, because we'd already done all the voice acting and all the lines and everything. The writing process came from a flowchart of our intended chapters, and we wrote a brief summary about what each chapter was supposed to be about. And then the actual script writing could be delegated to anyone, right? You could just check the summary of the chapter and then write that scene. It didn't matter who you are. If you knew what the other chapters meant, just read that chapter summary and do it. But inevitably, this creates some coherence issues. Some people probably didn't understand the plot that well, or they didn't read the chapter summary well enough, or they downright just were feeling like a goofball. And one of the funniest examples of this was that in the final moments of me hunting people down during that weekend to make sure I have all their voice lines, I had this big Excel chart with all these chapters, and I kept asking our main voice actor, okay, that's good. I'm glad you sent me those, but where's chapter 14? Or whatever chapter it was. I don't know if it was 14. And every time he would send me stuff, I kept asking, okay, yeah, this is great, but where is chapter 14? And it was getting annoying. It was weird. It was like, where? Okay, I asked you last time, where's chapter 14? And then I finally realized the reason he never had sent chapter 14 is that if you check the script, whoever wrote chapter 14 didn't write it with his character in it, and he's the main character. So whoever wrote chapter 14, they wrote it between the characters Laggith and Ray, which at that time made it the only scene in the game that did not include our main character Christopher. So there were scenes like that just had to be completely rewritten because it didn't make sense. It was not what we intended at all. In retrospect, that first weekend was insanely fun, and it's so cool to see something that is truly the product of all the different people that were there at the same time, and nobody really having a sense of what it's gonna be like in the end. But certainly if we did this again, if I organized an event like this again, I would make sure there's back-end developers. Like, I'd make 100% sure that those people will show up, because the implementation process took a super long time. And if we were able to handle a bit of that implementation, a bit of the play testing, a bit of the bug testing during that weekend, while we had so many people ready and available on short notice, that whole process would have just been so much faster. Even if late, I feel like it could have taken a week or two rather than 15 months as it has. But hey, it's done, it's here, and it's certainly got a unique charm due to that frantic collaboration setting that it was made in. 100% of the content you see in the game is made by us. Even the music of the fictitious in-game band Grass Airship was created by our community. Super cool. So big shout out to everyone involved, but specifically extra shout out, extra thank you to Vale and Strawwelder, who did most of the art. Aiko did most of the music. Veki Numa wrote most of the script besides myself. Christopher was voice acted by Thriller, the main character. And Liblung did most of the work with the implementation and development. So special thanks to those people. And then thank you, of course, to everyone else who contributed. You know who you are, and you should be in the credits.